Welcome to the Modern Arizona Podcast. We share the stories of people whose lives are shaped by the legal system in Arizona and beyond. Each episode blends real experiences, expert insights, and practical guidance to give you a deeper understanding of the law and its impact on everyday life.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Modern Arizona Podcast. I'm your host, Billie, family law attorney, owner of Modern Law. And today I am joined by a local professional counselor, Nathan Williams. Nathan, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's great to finally meet you, Billie.
It's so good to meet you. You are a local therapist professional. You work with co-parenting families. You're forensically informed, you testify in court, and people have so many questions about this. So first, what brought you into this particular field of focus?
Yeah, question. I joined a practice about 5 years ago, and some of the people that work at the practice already had some background working in forensically informed therapy. So therapeutic intervention, for example, and they worked with high conflict divorce scenarios, sometimes worked with the children, sometimes worked with the co-parents or one of the co-parents. And so I thought it was really interesting. I've been a therapist for a long time, and I thought, well, I'm interested in kind of getting into something new and different. And so since I did, I really enjoyed it. It's certainly not for every therapist. In fact, there's not a lot that are comfortable with taking this kind of work, but it's become a real passion of mine, and I really enjoy helping families. I think in part because society doesn't do the best job of teaching us how to divorce, and so being able to work with families and support, the children, support the parents with knowing how to work in these types of high conflict systems and support their kids and work to make it a better situation it's good work.
It is good work. It's important work, but you're right. A lot of therapists and counselors really shy away from it, don't want anything to do with it because it is so messy and complex and high conflict. My very first question for you is it a conflict? Because different professionals have different ideas about this. Is it a conflict for you to be the individual counselor for more than one member of a family? So for instance, a parent and a child, or both parents and multiple children. What's your position on that?
That's a great question. And the answer is one that I can hear echoing from graduate school, and it depends. So a lot of it depends on the situation. In many cases, if I'm working like specifically with one parent, I'll try to stick to that instead of mixing roles or wearing different hats. So for example, if I'm doing family therapy and one of the parents wants to be seen, just talk to me individually, I might suggest, well, maybe have a different therapist to work with that's also informed, because it's just cleaner that way. Sometimes it might upset the other parent or family member that, there's a bias or you're showing favoritism because you see them outside of whenever you see us. So I try to be careful with that. It really is kind of a case by case decision. But ultimately want to make sure that it's being done in a way that kind of honors the confidentiality of people. But whenever you have a family or a couple or co-parents, for example, like we're not as focused on confidentiality. If one parent tells me something, like I can't hold that confidential, like I have to let the other parent know in that situation, or I think that's best practice versus keeping secrets for one, so when it's high conflict, especially, sometimes it's just in my mind, a cleaner approach to refer to another professional. Hopefully that answers that question.
Not really, but I want to focus in on the confidentiality piece. When are your sessions confidential, and when are you reporting, something that a child has told you to one or both parents? Or when are you reporting, one parent said XYZ to another parent?
Well, safety is always first, so there's nothing more important than safety and stability in my mind. And so if the child has done something that compromises their safety, that's parent information. So whether that's, the child is doing something that's against the law, they're in an unsafe situation, they're skipping school, whatever the things might be. They're using drugs or smoking. That's parent information. So a minor doesn't have the same level of confidentiality as an adult. Um, and so if I'm working with parents, I usually try to consider how the effect of one parent knowing this information is going to impact the relationship dynamic. But if it's about the child specifically, I usually want to make that pretty open information.
Many times, our client's perspective is that they are the good guy and the ex is the bad guy,
Mhm.
gender neutral, and that they want to spend their time convincing their therapist that they are the good guy and that all the source of the children's problems are the other parent, and they want to convince you that, and then they want you to testify to it. Do you ever feel that?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'll answer that by saying that pressure, just the presence of pressure and the co-parenting dynamic can be felt, you know. So when that comes into the office, I can usually tell like this is a high conflict situation, or this parent is experiencing a lot of stress and anxiety. And so you're getting one side of the story. And so it's always important to keep that in mind. It happens often that it is a blame. You know, it's starting with blaming or talking about how the other co-parent isn't doing a good job, or they're not doing what they're supposed to do, not following the core order. And it's tricky because you want to take that into consideration, but you have to recognize in this position that you're getting half of the story, you know, from that parent. And ideally, you know, if I'm working with a child, for example, that's in a situation like this, I want to do an intake with both parents so that I can get information from each of them, as opposed to just getting one parent's side of things.
How is your approach different if you are appointed by the court and you know that you're going to write a report and you know that you're going to be a witness in court versus you've been sought out privately by a parent, but it's for the same type of issues and you may end up in court?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So in some instances with the court, and being court appointed, I might be appointed as what's called a therapeutic interventionist. And in my mind, that's not therapy specifically, because in most of those cases, we're working on reunification with the child and one of the parents. So, and a lot of those instances, the child is resisting seeing the parent. They're not exercising the parenting time. As you could imagine, in that kind of a case, it's high conflict almost every single time. And so I approach that differently in the sense that I'm overseeing the treatment of the whole family in that. So if I suspect that dad could benefit from therapy, mom could benefit from therapy, the child needs an individual therapist. So if I'm appointed in that instance, I'm kind of reporting to the courts on the progress, or lack thereof of our work together. So that's a little bit different than being hired privately. Usually I am a therapist. So I have to make a decision. Am I going to try to do therapy here with just the child? Or is this going to be therapy with a parent and a child? Am I going to be focusing on just that relationship piece with them? So that would be a little bit different. And of course, in either situation, I could end up needing to testify. But in that TI example or therapeutic interventionist example, every 90 days, I usually am appearing to give progress reports and recommendations and support for my recommendations based on what's happening in the family system.
Do you ever do parental fitness assessments?
Not specifically. I do an intake process, and I have a series of questions to ask parents, which does involve parenting styles, how they work with the kid on boundaries, discipline, things of that nature. It's not specifically a parental fitness assessment. At least I don't call it, just call it an intake assessment. But I am simultaneously assessing that and looking for that as well.
Okay. How often do you think TI is effective?
Um, I would say for me, I try to go into it expecting it's going to be effective, and because I want that to expand. It is, it is effective, I would say, in most instances when recommendations are followed. How
Yeah.
often does that happen? I would say maybe somewhere in the nature of like half the time,
Half the
sometimes,
time.
yeah, sometimes for different reasons, it doesn't work out. And that could even be on the TI's perspective, like something occurred within the situation. There's been a board complaint or something like that. And a TI might say, like, listen, I don't think I want to continue working with this family. Like that kind of thing
Mhm.
happens.
A lot.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Which again is why a lot of therapists don't want to take this kind of work because it's stressful to deal with something like that. So it
Yes.
can happen from that angle, but it can also happen if just one parent just isn't willing to participate in this process, or in their participation, they're not willing to do the work that's necessary to improve it. So it's a mixed bag. Every family, of course, is different. Every situation is different. And so I'd like to say that I see more than a 50% success rate with that. But in many instances, sadly, it doesn't work out.
Yeah. So many times when I'm talking to these parents, they might be in TI,
Hmm.
and many times my advice to them, and I really want to know what you think about this, is like, just stop. 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 Stop.
Yeah.
Stop fighting. Like, start like focusing on being the best parent you can be.
Mm.
Tell your children they need to be respectful and behave well and go to parenting time. And then if something happens where that other parent breaks the relationship on their own or can't parent or there's a safety, that's when we go to court. But like trying
Yeah.
to have the court micromanage this parenting situation while you try to intervene and like, I don't know. I just don't know that it's effective. So tell me what you think.
Yeah. Well, I try to tell people like, you want to stay out of court. Like,
Yeah.
let's work to try to keep you out of the court system. Like, it's stressful, it's expensive, like it impacts your children, even though you might not think it does, right? The stress that you experience, kids absorb emotions, right? So it's hard to hide those things, right? So if you go to court, chances are you're just going to experience more stress. And so trying to take court out of the picture, if at all possible, I think is good advice to give people in general. And what I find is that one of the problems is that people take the dysfunctional spouse dynamics into the co parenting experience. And that needs to be seen as a completely different experience, if at all possible, because those dysfunctional spouse dynamics that you had before obviously didn't work out, right? They weren't effective. And so when you take that into the co parenting experience, that climate, that pressure, as I was talking about earlier, is likely to just cause more problems. So, um, something that can help with that is
Mhm.
to try to have the perspective of this co-parenting gig is kind of like a business. Like
Yeah.
we're not together anymore.
Right.
Now we're in kind of this business of trying to raise this kid as good as we can. We want them to be a good human, make good
Mhm.
decisions, and we want them to be emotionally well and healthy. So I think a lot of people just have a really hard time letting go of that spouse hat, if that makes sense. And they bring that into the co-parenting dynamic, but you need to take that off, that spouse hat, put on the co-parenting hat, so to speak, to be able to, focus more on what's important, your own self-regulation, your ability to seek clarification, avoiding the finger pointing, the blaming, all those things that lead to higher conflict, which is what tends to happen when you land in court, right? It's the conflict has gotten to that point, or as you mentioned, safety could be compromised.
Okay, so that's an excellent, excellent point. By definition, a couple has broken up. They have a broken relationship. They have unhealthy dynamics, which is why they are no longer together, but that relationship continues even though the job now is completely different. What are some ways that people can help themselves, get over the fact that they don't respect their co-parent. I mean,
Mhm.
by the time you divorce, you do not respect your co-parent. You don't respect what it is they have to say. You might be harboring, resentment and betrayal and
Mhm.
anger. How can they go from that to understanding, this is my co-parent. This is my child's other parent.
Yeah.
They have a voice. They matter. I have to recognize that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one thing that people can do is, and this is really important, but that is to educate themselves. As I mentioned, I don't think society really teaches us how to divorce well in general. And many people come from divorced homes themselves that are now finding themselves in these co-parenting situations. So there's a lot of great books out there, read books, listen to great podcasts, get a therapist, get a divorce coach. But learning how to be a neutral co parent seems to be, at least in my mind, one of the most effective approaches. So instead of wearing that spouse hat, we move into a neutral position. And as a neutral co parent, your top priority is emotion regulation.
Mm.
Because when you're able to regulate your own emotions and have more attention to yourself and less focus on the other, that gives you more peace and allows you to co parent more effectively. So, um, a neutral co parent can detach when necessary. If things start to escalate, they know that, okay, this is not going anywhere good. I need to take a step back. They take responsibility for their behavior and maybe even more importantly, take responsibility for your emotions. So in many of these cases, people have a really hard time taking responsibility for their own emotions, and they have trouble with not projecting that emotion onto the other parent. And that parent is the problem. They are the ones that are causing all of these issues, right? So that leads to a whole host of other issues, distorted ways of thinking, black and white thinking, making assumptions, on and on and on. And all of this creates that pressure, this dysfunction in the relationship and a tension that makes it really hard to co-parent well in those kinds of climates. So the neutral co-parent approach is imperative to being able to co-parent well with an ex.
Another issue that comes up a lot that I think is hard. I struggle with this and advising people on this is like once your kids get to be, is this the transition? So, of children, as they developmentally progress, their voice matters more and more. And so, if a 16-year-old is telling a parent, I don't like the way this other parent treats me, this happens, this
Mm-hmm.
happens, this happens, I'm not going to their house,
Mm-hmm.
they have a lot more, I think they have a lot more autonomy to, and that's just kind of how it plays out in the courts. I'm not sure. Do you agree, or are you a black and white 18 is 18?
Well, not always. You
Okay.
know, in fact, I've worked in situations where a child is close to 18 and there
Yeah.
really wasn't much that the court could do, right, to enforce the parenting time.
Yeah. So for me, like there's that between 16 and 18 when I think kids have a whole lot more say about and need to really focus on their individual relationships with their parents, and the courts
Mhm.
just tend to be less involved because they can get themselves out. Like one mom was talking about how her daughter was leaving and getting on a bus and going to her mom's house, and then is mom expected to drag this 16-year-old out of a house? My answer is no.
Mhm.
But sometimes we have 12 and 13-year-olds saying the exact same things, and that feels like a different situation. What is your advice on that?
Well, I'll start by saying generally, it's really important for a child to have a relationship with both parents and ideally a good relationship with both parents. It's not going to be conflict free,
Right.
but a good relationship with both parents is really important, and parents need to recognize that. And that's one of the really difficult things that comes out of having high conflict is if a parent really dislikes the other, it's hard for them because they almost feel in a way that, like, well, my kid needs to dislike them too, or my kid needs to feel this way also, and kids absorb that. So in many high conflict situations, some of that resistance is due to, in many cases, what the favored parent is saying or how the favored parent is functioning. Now, it could be that the kid is having some real conflict with that other parent. And part of, again, being a neutral co-parent and supporting the relationship that that kid has with the other parent is informing the kid. And I would say at most any age below 18 that like there's a court order and our family takes court order seriously. And as a part of that court order, you do need to spend time with your dad. You do need to spend time with your mom. And if you have some issues with your parent, I really want to support you in talking to them about that. And I want to encourage you to have a voice in your relationship and work through those issues with your parent if at all possible, because the withdrawal is usually not going to help your situation or your relationship, right? In fact, it
The
just teaches
withdrawal
that.
of the child
Yeah.
saying,
So if the child is withdrawing from the parent, that's not necessary. If I'm supporting that as the favorite parent, I'm not really teaching the kid healthy relationship skills,
right?
because if there is conflict, I want my kid to have enough faith in themselves that I can work through conflict. And that's what
Yeah.
healthy attachment looks like, is I can work through this. So they need the favored parent support in doing that.
Yeah. Okay. So to the parent of that 12 and 13-year-old, um, and the 12 and 13-year-olds coming home and they're articulating, this person doesn't respect my boundaries. They're walking around naked in front of me. They're doing really inappropriate things. They're
Hmm.
taking my door so I have no privacy, or whatever,
Yeah.
inappropriate things that are not abusive. You tell that child you need to speak up for yourself.
Well, I do. I would say that you do need to have a voice and speak up at those things. If there's really inappropriate things, as you mentioned, walking around naked and whatnot, that needs to be a parent conversation, I would say, as well. Like we need to at least try to address that together. And of course, in many instances, that conversation might not go well.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
I mean, so
but
what you just brought up is also something people really, really struggle with. When does one parent reach out to another parent? And when is it, it's your parenting time, you do what you want.
mhm.
You have the autonomy to run your household how you want to versus advocating for your kids.
Yeah. Yeah. So when I think about that, I guess one of the words that comes to my mind is help. And I think that when people consider going on these co-parenting journeys, they can feel very alone in the experience of being a co-parent as a single parent. Um, but if you can develop a united front with your co-parent and have a good, healthy relationship, again, the neutral dynamic tends to help. If your aim is like, I want to help my co-parent with this issue, right? Instead of, I want to criticize them and tell them how wrong and how big of a problem they are, that's usually not going to be received well. So if I'm considering, my role as a co-parent is to try to make this as good as I can in this business, right? How can I help my fellow business partner in trying to solve a problem, right? So I want to seek clarification first of all, because it's not out of the realm of possibility that the kid's not being honest about, walking around naked or whatever it is, right? A kid they could say, I don't like the way that dad combs his hair, right? And that could be reason enough for a kid to say, like, well, I don't want to go over there anymore. Don't like how he combs his hair. There's probably a lot more to it than that. But in general, I think having that united front and being able to help your other co-parent work through those things together can be helpful. But if we're critical, if we're demeaning, if we're blaming, and finger pointing towards them, and that's not supportive of trying to solve the problem.
Okay. So that's really good information, I think. So reaching out to your co-parent and saying, hey, our child has been saying X, Y, and Z and really complaining
Hmm.
about a lot of stuff to me. And I want to make sure that we're not being pitted against one another. Like that's always a good thing to say, right? I want to make sure that we're on the same page. We're not being pitted against each other
Yeah.
and determine the extent of this truth and then help figure out something that's going to resolve that conflict for
Hmm.
right? Does that not sound condescending? No.
Well, well, if you're working together and you're trying to come up with solutions, I mean, maybe it could come off as condescending to some, but ultimately, you're trying to solve a problem. You're trying to ask for what can we do. And that's assertive communication, and that's the healthiest kind versus aggressive communication, passive communication, or just plain passive where I'm not saying anything at all. Right. So if I'm assertive with you and I'm saying, like, hey, this is a problem and I need you to help me work it out, here's what I need from you. That might sound condescending, but
Mhm.
my aim is still to solve the problem. And I'm
Mhm.
trying to seek clarification, get the facts that are necessary to
Mhm.
work on this together.
So when you're doing individual counseling, are you helping parents work through this type of issue?
In
How to
some cases,
communicate?
yeah, in some cases I am, teaching some basic communication skills. I like to refer to the BIF approach from Dr. Billie and Annette Burns. They wrote a book on that, and that's helped a lot of my clients. I look, and I guess my clinical approach has kind of always been to try to find something simple that is effective. Because even in the midst of a divorce or the co-parent, like it is, there's so many moving parts, and it can feel so overwhelming. It's overwhelming to be a single parent anyway, you know? So, like, what are some simple ways that I can communicate, right? And so, Biff, for example, that brief, informative, friendly, and firm. If I can do that, then I can check over and make sure I did. And that's me doing the best that I can to try to be friendly, try to work together, using a template that's simple.
If parents are really struggling with their children, let's say they're newly separated or newly divorced and they want some resources for how they can best help their kids, what are some resources that you recommend?
Um, One of my favorite books is oh my goodness, now I'm trying to think of it. So it's called 33 Co-Parent Solutions.
Hmm.
Um, and it's by an author named John Moran, and it is chock full of great information. I would also say a book called Divorce Poison by Richard Warshak is also a great read as well. These books are really enlightening to help you understand what healthy co parenting looks like from a really practical standpoint and the things not to do. Because as I mentioned, with getting divorced, like we haven't maybe learned how to function in that in a healthy way. And so it's necessary for you to educate yourself more about what does it look like to do this in a healthy way. 'Cause in some instances, people are engaging in alienating behavior without even realizing that they're doing it, you know?
I think it happens a lot. I think we all probably mess up.
Yep, absolutely.
Now, where's the line?
Yeah.
And then you've got like a war on TI and surrounding alienation.
Hmm.
There are parents who have, I don't even know what they call themselves, but they have decided that family court is a corrupt organization that wants to steal children, and their judges are in bed, for lack of a better term, with therapists like you,
Yeah.
and they're just trying to extort parents for money. Can you address that? I
Hmm.
think relatively recent, um, I don't even know what to call it, propaganda?
Yeah. I mean, I don't believe that the judges even want to see you, actually. They don't want you in their courtroom. So, they're not necessarily hoping to thrive on conflict, So, it's the intervention that takes place because it's absolutely necessary. You guys weren't able to figure it out together, so now we got to take it to the courts. And I don't believe that the judges really want you in there, or that it's the best thing for people unless it really hits a certain point where there is a safety issue, for example, or maybe that there's not exercise parenting time or something like that. But ultimately, um, I don't believe that about the court system. I think that they're doing the best that they can with what they have. And it's not possible for everyone to go into court and walk out happy. That's just not the way that it works. Um, so naturally, you're going to have some people that are upset about that process and that don't agree with the judge or believe that the court system is out just to get them. I hear that with clients all the time.
Do you think that parental alienation is real?
That's a great question, and I know there's a lot of discussion around that. Um, I do believe that parents can do and say things that can have an alienating effect on the child. I do believe that that is possible. And the reason is just just our primal nature to absorb emotions from one another. And kids, as you know, are kind of like their brains are like sponges, you know? So if a kid catches wind of certain things, right, they can start to adopt and absorb some of those same types of emotions that create resistant dynamics in the relationship with a parent and increase the conflict overall.
Okay, this is the last question. In intact families and, families of divorce, it's not unusual for kids to gravitate personality wise to one parent over the other. You simply may have, and even in intact families, kids that click more with one parent and might spend more time with one parent, have a closer relationship with one parent. And that's allowed in an intact family. But when you have a divorced family and a 50-50 parenting time, there's no room for that, for the concept of um, compatibility.
Mhm.
What is your opinion on that?
My opinion on which part of that can I ask? Like the
Well,
concept
it
of
it it seems
compatibility?
normal and natural, and it happens that,
Mhm.
kids don't spend the same amount of time with each parent in an intact family, but they're
Yeah.
forced to if parents are divorced. Do you
Yes.
think that's a problem or not?
That's a great question. So this is just one of the challenging effects of going through a divorce process is that what once was in place and if the kid gravitated more towards one parent because they both liked sports, for
Mhm,
example, son and dad really liked sports, mom could maybe care less about sports but
mhm.
was willing to support it, just for an example, like it's going to be different, right? Divorce, it shakes things up, and now that kid gets half the time with one where maybe he used to get like more like 60-70% with one parent, or was just more connected with that parent, and now that's changed. There's pros and cons to everything, I suppose. This certainly provides like an opportunity for, in that situation, mom to build more of a relationship
Mhm.
with the son, and work on building more compatibility and connectedness with the child. But it's not a perfect system, and it just, when you go through the divorce, a lot of what once felt natural changes. You don't have that parent that's just with you now that you can bounce things off of about what's best for the kids, like in this, over dinner or something like that, or talking about school like that. That dynamic is gone, and now you're parenting on your own. You're doing the single parenting, and so obviously the co-parenting work together is really important. But yes, that is a tricky part of the kid's experience and the parent's experience. In many cases, a parent has maybe, they were a stay-at-home parent and they spent, 75-80% of the time with the kid, or mom or dad traveled, so that's going to be a dramatic shift for the kid to now get 50% with dad when he used to get like 10 or 15.
Mhm.
It's a huge change.
Mhm. Mhm. Do you think that 50-50 is the right default? There's so many opinions on this. There's some people who think that, 50-50 means that kids never have a home. They're always traveling. It would be much better for them to just have a home base and then, ample time with the other parent. What is your opinion as a therapist?
hmm it depends. I guess that's my answer. Um, it depends on, certainly, like if there's a situation where some parenting time needed to be taken away from a parent, or there needed to be supervised parenting, that to me seems justifiable. But generally speaking, um, each parent being able to have half the time with their kid, in most cases, I think probably feels like a blow to a parent anyway. Maybe not all cases, but in many, right? I literally have, I'm only going to be here for half of my kids, upbringing now. Like that can be heavy for some people to come to terms with. So, you know, you, you, you may not have always felt like it was a 50-50 thing. Maybe one parent was working all the time and supporting the family financially, and they feel like, well, I've been taking care of our family in this way, but let's say the mom was there with raising the kid all the time. I've been taking care of them in this way. I mean, that's a really um, hard dynamic and question to answer, I think. But ultimately, 50-50 is you get half and I get half. And that's probably the closest that you can find to fair. And
Fair, yes. But what about, my question is, do you think it's best for kids?
I believe that can depend on the situation. Yeah, I believe that it could depend on it. But generally, I think it probably is the best because of what I mentioned earlier about the importance of a kid having a good relationship with both parents.
Mm-hmm.
You know, on a case by case basis, maybe a judge could have um, enough reason to make a change with that.
Mm-hmm.
But I know it's more common that it's just going to be 50-50, even if it hasn't been when the parents are together.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's difficult, but um, as I'm thinking about it, 50% feels like a loss,
Yeah.
whereas I used to be around my child a lot more than 50% of the time. So um, it it conveys that both parents are kind of shouldering the burden of this new experience and the challenges that come with it, while hopefully getting some quality time with their child as well.
Thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about all these things with me.
You're
This
welcome.
is what my clients are grappling with every single day, well beyond their divorce, and certainly while they're going through their divorce. So thank you so much for that perspective. Where are you located here in the Valley?
The office is in Mesa. Yep, just off the 60 and Country Club Road, Arizona Counseling Collective.
And do you do virtual appointments and in person?
Yes, I do both.
And taking clients, I presume?
Currently taking some clients. I have a couple of openings. I don't have a lot of space right now, but I can take a couple.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really have appreciated the conversation, and we'll make sure everybody knows how to contact you. Thanks so much for listening to the Modern Arizona podcast. If you've enjoyed what you've heard today, make sure to download it, like it, leave a review, and share it with your friends. If you know someone who would be a good guest or you would like to be on the Modern Arizona podcast, make sure to give us an email or reach out to us at mymodernlaw.com.